Has the freight market flipped yet? On this episode of Driven Too Far, we're going to find out if you should be running on a percentage or pay-per-mile owner-operator contract.
Hello, I'm Andrew Winkler with Chief Carriers, and this is Driven Too Far, the truth about trucking, a podcast that helps over-the-road truck drivers balance career and family.
Hey, welcome back to Driven Too Far. On this episode, we want to know if you're better off running on a pay-per-mile type owner-operator contract or a percentage-based contract. And it really comes down to where the market is. So both programs can work in a lease purchase type scenario. But I want to start off talking a little bit about Nick. I'm going to tell you the story about Nick. Was a driver with us for about 3 or 4 years, came on as a company guy, nice young man, had a young family, did a good job as a company driver. And of course, when we introduced our lease purchase or our lease operator programs, he had interest because he was hungry. He wanted to make more money. He wanted to move up, take that next step in his driving career to see what he could do. So Nick was a solid runner. So what I mean by that is, you know, he made a commitment to be out on the road away from his family for several weeks at a time. And while he was out there, he was dedicated to doing the job right, running the miles he needed. So from my perspective, I really thought Nick was a good candidate to be a lease operator. So we went down that path with him. And, you know, for several years, he did a fantastic job. There was one point he came back to me in probably 2022 and he said, listen, he says, I got a buddy that's also a lease operator, but he's running on a percentage type contract. Have you ever considered paying your drivers on a percentage type contract? And the answer was sure. We always look at that stuff. And for a long time, we've been a pay per mile type thing plus a fuel surcharge. But I'm never above taking a look at something. I'm always curious. We want to see success in our drivers. And if one way was better than the other, you know, how could we make that change? How can we make that driver more successful? I got to give Nick some compliments. One of the things I thought he did well when he jumped into the lease program for us was I thought he chose wisely with his truck. So we run a couple different models of trucks in the fleet. One's Freightliner, one's Peterbilt. The Peterbilts, we had 2 different models. One was a little bit longer nose style, and the other was the aerodynamic style. But Nick chose wisely, in my opinion. He didn't get caught up in what kind of logo or emblem was on the hood of that truck. He chose the Freightliner, which is probably a little less sexy, you know, I suppose in the industry for most drivers anyway. But what was wise about the Freightliner was it's the most reliable truck we had in the fleet. It's the easiest to get serviced when it does break down. And the fuel mileage was better than anything else in the fleet. So I thought he made a wise choice there. Fast forward a couple years, Nick's doing a great job. And again, he came to me in 2022, like I said, and he was telling me about his buddy that had some success on a percentage. So I said, you know what, Nick, let me do a study. Let me look at that with our numbers, with our contract rates from our customers, and let me see what that looks like, and I'll get back to you. So I did that. I studied our pay per mile and how drivers, what they were kind of averaging for take home or gross per week. And then I took the same loads that I'd studied on the pay per mile, and I switched that over to a percentage basis. And I think I used 75% as the pay. In 2022, if you remember, as we came off COVID, there was a huge demand for trucks. Rates were up. Everybody's living large, doing great. But in 2022 is kind of when they started declining and sliding backwards a little bit. So at the end of my study, at least the point in time when I studied it, I thought it was kind of a wash. And I went back and I told him that. I said, listen, you could certainly do a percentage, and maybe there's small pockets around the country that percentage makes more sense. But what I was seeing with the current rates and kind of the trend of rates, I thought we were better off just sticking with the pay per mile type pay. So Nick didn't really have any issues with that. I think if I remember right, he thanked me for the, checking it out, at least looking into it and stuff. And we've gone on. And fast forward till today, Nick gave notice, which is, you always hate to see good drivers leave. But at the same time, I knew where Nick was going with this. I knew that he never quite got that percentage thought out of his mind. And that's exactly what he's doing. So again, I think he's probably got some friends out there in the business that have been trying to encourage him to, come check this out or try this. And that's what he's going to go pursue. One of the challenges, when you're a driver and you're looking at which way to go, you got to base your decision on the numbers. And unfortunately, as a driver, you don't always have access to those numbers. Maybe a carrier will, share some of those with you. Maybe they'll share an aggregate or an average of what their overall rate per mile is. So you could actually, kind of figure that out and run your own numbers, which would be great. I would tell you, one of the things I've always thought was interesting as I talk to drivers, and remember, I started as a driver 30 years ago too. So I certainly probably thought this way too until I worked my way into the office. But I think drivers have the perception that companies make a lot more money than we actually do in trucking. And I kind of want to tell you how that works because, the small to mid-sized carrier, and I'm talking a carrier maybe with 50 to 250 trucks, something like that. I think when freight rates are average, and the carrier or the companies run well, I think they can expect a 5 to 10% type of return on an annual basis. Now, when you get into the big guys, the mega carriers, they have so much more advantage when it comes to leverage and, the ability to scale and things like that with their purchasing power. You think about all those things. A well-run large carrier could maybe make a return up to 20% or so. And it's what I've seen in the industry over the years. Again, there's always going to be exceptions here and there. Some do it better, some do it worse type thing. But 5 to 10%, when you're looking at that small to mid-sized carrier, that's not a lot of return. When you think about all the investments, the capital investments in equipment, the risks that truckload carriers take while they're out there operating on the roads, the cost of constantly looking and hiring and training drivers and staff and stuff like that, it's not one of those industries where you get rich quick. So I think that's important for drivers to understand that while it may appear that the trucking company makes a lot of money, they really don't. And the other thing I want drivers to understand is the cycle in trucking. So forget the COVID years for just a little bit because that was an anomaly. It certainly doesn't work like that. But what I've kind of seen over the years is kind of about a 7-year cycle. So in trucking, you can expect maybe 1 to 2 really good years where there's a high demand for the trucks, rates blow up, we can raise rates with our shippers and do really well for a couple years. Then there's usually 3 to 4 years in the middle of that where rates and the returns are just kind of average. We do okay, we made some money, but we're certainly not getting fat with those returns. And then there's the 1 to 2 years where things dip down and maybe we're not making any money. Maybe we got our head underwater just a little bit. So when you think of that cycle for that 7-year period, you got a couple really good years, some average years, and some bad years, and that's what we see. Now, COVID, as I've kind of talked before, was the exception because after we came out of COVID, a lot of us did really well. We could kind of name our rates out there. And as things started to slide down, we got ourselves into a trough. So for the last 30 months, trucking's been in a trough where a lot of us are burning through cash. We're not necessarily making money or, we just kind of got barely our head above water. And we're hoping for better days, and we keep waiting for that to happen. We keep waiting for the freight market to flip where we can go back to the customers, raise rates, get them up where we need to be. Because remember, all that time that's going on, the expenses almost never go down. You think about the cost of trucks, the cost of insurance, the cost of wages for drivers. None of that has really gone backwards. So it's been a kind of a tough run here lately. So I share that with you because as we jump back to Nick and Nick's story, I think timing is and can be critical if you're going to look at a pay per mile or a percentage-based program. Obviously, the pay per mile is kind of the steady program. It's something you as a driver can count on. You can kind of calculate it out. If you know what your average miles are, you have a pretty good idea what your gross paycheck's going to look like at the end of each week. With the percentage-based, It's probably not something you want to be in when the markets are down, because the rates are probably below operating costs in a lot of cases, and you're only getting a percentage of that. It's really hard to keep your head above water, whether you're a single operator, you got a handful of trucks, whatever that looks like. So I'm proud of Nick. He did a great job for us, and I know this is something he's wanted to do for a long time, and I'm glad that he's going to try it, and I wish him great success in it, because I think he's a smart kid, and I think he can have some success at it if the markets cooperate with him and if he lines himself up with the right carrier that has the right customers. Now, one other thing that could be critical in that is if you're looking to do that, if you're looking to move carriers or to a different company to drive for, one of the things you want to ask is how much of your freight is contract-based versus on the spot market. So how much freight are they hauling directly for customers, and how much freight are they pulling for brokers? I would be cautious if anybody was less than 80% contract rate, because if you're going on percentage, then you're getting the best and you're getting the highest rates you probably can. If they run for a lot of brokers, you got to remember that broker's already probably taken 15 to 20% out of the overall rate, and then your company's only going to give you 75% of that or 70%, whatever it looks like. That's a big chunk. So I think that would be very difficult to make it. If you go to work for a company that runs on a high percentage of broker freight, be cautious with that. So make sure you ask that question. So again, Nick's last week, we parted on great terms. I wish him the best, and I hope that we can stay in contact, because honestly, I'm curious. I would like to know what kind of success he has. And I think part of the draw for him too was, he lives on the East Coast, and he was working for us where we live out in the middle of the United States, or operate out of there. He has a young family, and I think there was some draw there too, where maybe he could get closer to home, where he's home more often and stuff. And you certainly can't blame a driver for wanting to do that, take care of family first type stuff. But the bottom line is, when the market is strong, the percentage model can work, and it can work well for you. If the market's average or weak, I think the pay per mile is probably the steady choice for you, and it gives you some security and predictability, because once it goes negative or goes weak, you're still making that same predictable cents per mile for that carrier, and that can definitely benefit you and help you keep your head above water during tougher times. There's no right or wrong answer to this question. It really comes down to timing and run the numbers. You got to do that for yourself, but see what information you can get out of the carrier either working for or thinking about working for. If they'll give you an average rate per mile, something like that, so you can run your own numbers and you can make a better decision. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Driven Too Far. If you're looking for a carrier that has a great lease program, check us out at chiefcarriers.com.